Yes.
The Leaf Street Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1222 of the War News Stream. And we have big news today coming out of Iran and Russia. We are hearing of secret Iranian sites explode mysteriously near Tehran. We're also hearing the Iranian officials declare revenge on U.S. officials today. And also, there's been major Ukrainian drone attacks in Russia and also in Crimea as well. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we've been able to hear significant developments from inside the Islamic Republic of Iran that the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khameini, is now calling for members and followers of the Iranian state to conduct some sorts of attacks against the governments of Israel and the United States of America, wherever their followers or wherever these officials may be. While at the same time, we are also starting to hear that the propensity for further strikes by the Israelis against the Iranians and future American strikes against the Iranians appear to be rising, as this statement has been issued today. We were able to hear that sources close to Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, that the war is certainly not off of the table, and it does appear that the Israelis, along with the United States, are still considering possible potential action against the Islamic Republic of Iran against them for their attempts at nuclearization, which was very hard for me to get out right there. Meanwhile, outside of that news, we were able to hear that inside of the state of Ukraine, the Ukrainian armed forces have been able to conduct massive drone attacks throughout the entirety of the Russian Federation, with explosions being reported inside of Crimea and the Kursk Oblast. We were able to confirm that troop basing locations, as well as significant force bases and locations have been targeted and destroyed in the course of that attack. Meanwhile, in the area of the Marinovka airfield, we have been able to confirm even further damage to the Russian Su-34 fighter bombers and airbase that is at the area of Marinovka. And we are able to confirm that it appears that at least 4 Su-34 fighter bombers have been taken out of action, along with the logistical facilities at the base. Meanwhile, Ukrainian armed forces are continuing to dauntingly defend their front lines at the moment throughout the entirety of the state of Ukraine, as the armed forces of Ukraine were able to shoot down hundreds of drones and missiles overnight, and are also continuing to conduct their defensive actions throughout the entirety of the Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia front. We have also been able to hear that Ukrainian armed forces have had some success in retaking some of the lost ground in Sumy, as the Ukrainians were able to retake another village entirely, completely today, within the area of the Sumy offensive front. We have a massive amount of news coming from quite literally all around the world at the moment, and I do want to point out that tonight is the Sunday night fundraiser, and we are going to be fundraising for Nova Ukraine tonight, an amazing nonprofit based inside of Ukraine that has been helping out Ukrainian citizens to get out of harm's way and danger, and to be able to provide food, shelter, blankets, and the like, as well as medical treatment, and also even the stimulus packages for soldiers for them to be able to go to college. Pretty much a private funded version of a GI Bill in the state of Ukraine. It is a massive amount of news that we have to cover tonight, and hopefully folks will be able to support the fundraiser and help our fundraiser to be able to reach the fundraiser goal of $2.5 thousand. But getting on into the major news that we have for the day, we've been able to hear significant developments out of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Middle East as a whole, as we were able to hear statements made today by the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ali Khameini, that Iran's Grand Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi has issued a fatwa, which is pretty much an Iranian court ruling or an issuance, calling Muslims around the world to try and attack the leaders of the United States or the State of Israel, declaring them enemies of God. As some of y'all may or may not know, the Islamic Republic of Iran is actually a religious theocracy for the large part, as well as a dictatorship. It actually has a lot of different titles to it, but particularly one thing that is a little bit special to the Islamic Republic of Iran that you don't really find elsewhere is that the leader of the country is also the religious leader of the state as well at the exact same time. And more so, the religious leader is far more important than the actual government leaders. This leads the Iranians to have an interesting sort of a relationship with their ecclesiarchy, and the ecclesiarchy is practically a weapon in itself of the Islamic Republic of Iran's government. And it does appear that they are calling on anyone who considers himself to be a follower of the Islamic Republic of Iran to move forward with attempts to attack the U.S., the leader of the United States or the leader of the State of Israel in these upcoming present days. It does appear that this statement is once again not the kind of statement that we would be believing to see after such a tremendous air attack or air campaign was conducted by the State of Israel and the United States of America against the Iranian nuclear weapons research facilities, as well as the Iranian armed forces on the ground. It appears that the Islamic Republic of Iran has absolutely no wish or intention at the moment of ever backing down, and are in fact attempting to escalate the situation through some sort of proxy forces, so that way they'll be able to try and see if they can end up causing some significant damage either to Israeli or U.S. leadership here within the near future. I would have to say quite obviously that the Islamic Republic of Iran is not backing down at all. We've been saying that for days, and it does appear quite clear by these statements. Not only that, but the Iranians are trying to take the cowardly option because they know that their country would get vaporized in a mere instant if they attempted to try and threaten the life of a leader of the United States. It appears that they're attempting to try and get their followers around the world to follow through on those threats for them on their behalf. We've also been able to hear that apparently, at least according to intelligence or information that's been provided recently, according to intercepted communications between senior Iranian officials obtained by the United States and reported on by the Washington Post, last weekend strikes by the U.S. Air Force and Navy against 3 nuclear facilities in Iran, the Isfahan, Natanz, and as well as the Fordow enrichment facilities, was not as devastating and extensive as they had expected, sparking concerns currently circulating within the U.S. government that the Iranian nuclear program could soon resume. The communications, intended to be private, included Iranian government officials speculating as to why the strikes directed by the U.S. president were not as destructive as they had anticipated, with the existence of the intercepted conversations not being disputed by the White House, largely meaning that these intercepted communications are actually factual and accurate, at least according to the statements of the White House here recently. One thing that is interesting to note, however, and I do want to point this out to all of y'all, is that if you look around the surrounding hillsides here to the Natanz enrichment facility, which you're seeing right here, you'll actually notice this interesting speckling pattern around the facility. And also you'll see that a lot of the soil, or at least the topsoil, has been charred or blackened. This is actually showing something a little bit interesting. We have not seen this to any kind of quality or degree that we've seen so far, at least in this satellite picture. But if we go to this enrichment facility here, you actually will see that based on what we're seeing, this satellite picture and this satellite picture combined, it appears that a significant fire actually broke out on the very surface itself, even in the non-existent underbrush conditions that are in this very very arid region of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and actually did burn a decent amount of the surface layer on the facility itself and even outside of it. This is showing us that at least at the time there was some sort of a large fire that may have been venting out of the openings of the GBU-57 MOPS that ended up hitting the facility. But once again, we are not entirely sure how severe the damage is or isn't at this point, but it appears that it's a continuous back and forth right now as to whether the damage was so severe that it completely destroyed the facility, or whether it was moderate or light enough that the facility is actually operational even in its current configuration. Nonetheless, it does appear quite obvious at the moment, however, that the Islamic Republic of Iran is even going further in trying to save face. I would say that this is going well beyond saving a face. This is pretty much acting like they control the situation, as the Iranian Foreign Minister Arachi has stated that countries that launched attacks on Iran must compensate for the damage caused. Pretty much saying that the United States and Israel have to pay them money to compensate them for the damage that's been caused to the Iranian nuclear research facilities that were hit and destroyed by U.S. and Israeli airstrikes over the course of last week. Even still outside of that, within the southwestern region of the city of Tehran, we were able to see that some sort of explosions and fires were happening near to a possible military base or industrial site, but that video is not apparently loading for some reason, so we'll just be skipping past that and moving on into the rest of our news. If you did see the clip, however, or you're able to watch it somehow, it generally shows a fire inside of an industrial complex within the southwestern area of Tehran, and it is appearing that it may have been a result of a strike or some form of sabotage that was conducted by operatives that were on the ground. Nevertheless, it does appear that the Islamic Republic of Iran is attempting to start to outpace themselves, at least for their confidence in themselves, considering the fact that the leaders of Iran largely survived by the benevolence of the United States and the State of Israel. But a lot of people have been talking about this, and Matthew, what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so clearly the Iranians are getting very frustrated with the fact that they've been hit, and largely they were not able to do anything in return to the United States for us striking all their nuclear facilities, so they're naturally going to ramp things up a little bit. And today we did hear that Iran has issued a fatwa. Apparently that means a ruling in Iran, I guess. It's calling for fatal revenge on Western leadership that carried out the strikes on Iran, and how should the U.S. respond to that threat that they clearly made very directly. So 52% said the U.S. should strike Iran very quickly, while 26% said we should ramp up U.S. domestic security, and 15% said ignore the Iranian stupidity and just let it fall on deaf ears. And this one right here, I actually have a very strong opinion about. I view this as a declaration of war. When a foreign leader says they want to come and hurt or eliminate our leader in this country, in the United States, that to me is war. It's time to go topple that regime at that point, because apparently they've lost fear of the United States. And with Iran being so rogue and trying to develop nuclear missiles and weapons, it's becoming very obvious that they cannot control themselves anymore at all, and it's time to exact some revenge on Iran instead before they can do it on us. So I'm actually with the 53%. I think the U.S. should strike Iran quickly, and our new goal in Iran should be regime change. That should be the steadfast goal that we're going for here, not simply striking the nuclear sites. We need to get rid of that Iranian regime because they're clearly out of their minds. They're crazy. And if they're willing to do that to the U.S., then they're willing to do it to anybody, because the U.S. is the most powerful military country on the planet, and they're willing to come after us. And they're telling people to commit acts of terror to support their goals. So obviously not good. And I think we should deal with that very harshly and very quickly. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd say that this is quite clearly what would have been expected from the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is, after all, a terrorist state. Many people wouldn't know that if they like to pay attention. Some people like Tucker Carlson might benefit from listening to the statements that were made by the Iranian government today. But one thing that is quite important, at least in my opinion, to observe from this, is that the United States of America largely did operate with a great deal of benevolence and not turning Ali Khameini into a smear on the pavement in the last airstrikes that we conducted. But that was a general decent amount of self-control, because we could have wiped the guy out, and regardless of what would have happened in Iran, considering that there probably would have been a significant power vacuum at that point, we could have done it anyways, or the Israelis could have done it for the large part. And yet we didn't. And we thought that because we did not do that, that these barbaric leaders inside of Iran were going to understand the benevolence and constraint that we just showed, and then they were going to respond by actually being courteous to us, although we destroyed the nuclear weapon of mass destruction program that they were working on because they wanted to kill millions of Americans and Israelis. Now we're shocked to hear that the Islamic Republic of Iran is now actually calling for the deaths of American officials and leaders and Israeli officials and leaders, and now this is a shocking thing to us. I would say that it's not shocking at all, and we should have seen this coming. And I'd also have to say, on top of that, that the Islamic Republic of Iran's government should not be allowed to exist. A statement like this is one that's absolutely insane, and it is showing that the Islamic Republic of Iran's government is as dangerous, extreme, and rogue as we have been saying here on this channel for the past year and a half. The problem with the Middle East isn't the Middle East. The problem with the Middle East is the Islamic Republic of Iran. And the faster we get to realizing that, and pretty much wiping out all of the top leaders in the Islamic Republic of Iran and seeing their government torn to shreds, I think that that probably would be the quickest and greatest resolution that we would see to the ongoing tumult that continues to grip the Middle East until this very present day. It's an absolutely insane thing to see that the Iranians would call for some sort of extreme action like this, and I would have to say that in my honest opinion, it appears to be a statement of war. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. But I do not believe that we should sit idly by as these statements are being made. I think that we simply should go over and make sure that Khameini no longer has the ability to speak to issue further such threats as these or any other top officials in the Iranian government. As a matter of fact, I believe that we should compensate the foreign minister, considering that they did say that compensation was so duly needed due to the damage that we caused to the Islamic Republic of Iran. I say that we issue compensation to the foreign minister, Ali Khameini, and any other top Iranian officials by that of the JDAM. I consider that to be a payment in full because the costs of those munitions is far more than their meek, miserable lives could ever have been. But beyond that, we will be moving on into the state of Israel, as it does appear that the Israelis are largely moving into those claims and statements as well, as it does appear that they are saying that an end to the conflict is not on their agenda whatsoever, at least according to Israeli media, who are citing higher-up officials within the Israeli government close to Netanyahu. It does appear quite evident at this point that the Israelis, while having backed off for now, will not be backing off for an incredibly long period of time. And they will most likely be returning to strikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran here within the near future, as they do believe that the Islamic Republic of Iran still poses a significant threat, even if they are denuclearized, which it seems that that's still up in the air at the moment. It appears that they are still a significant threat and danger to the state of Israel through their conventional means, conducting acts of terror through Hezbollah, Hamas, and also conducting general acts of terror through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran as well. It does appear that the United States of America may also be joining in on those notions as well, because we have been able to hear statements inside of the United States that there has appeared, unfortunately I didn't put any of those links down, but it does appear that they are also considering future bombing operations against the Islamic Republic of Iran, any possible regime change at this point, possibly eliminating Ali Khamenei and top government officials in upcoming airstrikes. But outside of that, we have also been able to hear, and really quickly I do want to say this, I do know that a lot of people are talking about the situation going on in Idaho. Sadly, that is outside of our purview of news. We generally do not cover any domestic topics or developments, and so far we do not know any of the people who are involved in that attack at the moment or who they are affiliated with to even include that into any kind of international world news. There are a lot of extremist groups that do exist within northern Idaho, so it could quite literally be just about any of them. So, of course, it's an unfortunate situation to hear about, but we won't be covering that tonight, and we can't even speculate at the moment on if this weighs into the international situation at all, due to a lack of information about the people who are purportedly conducting this horrendous attack just outside of Coeur d'Alene. So we will be waiting to see if anything develops on that that would make that a part of world news or start to show some sort of a greater Iranian action here on the domestic home front. And if it does not, then it will not make it into our news. It's an unfortunate domestic incident, but that doesn't make it into our news coverage. If it is something that was sponsored or at least supported by the Iranians, it will definitely make it into our news coverage at a later date. Outside of that, though, it does appear that the Middle East is quite a interesting, I guess you could say, cannon that might be going off here quite soon. And I'd have to say that at least at this point, the cannons of the United States and Israel should go off against the Islamic Republic of Iran, because I consider threats to against current serving presidents to be a threat against the United States itself. Much like our prior president, which we also had to make this statement on as well for prior reasons, due to other threats that were issued by other countries, a president of the United States, whether you like them or not, is an elected representative of the United States of America and its citizenry as a whole. All 360 million people can look towards the president of the United States as their elected representative. They are pretty much the United States of America in a human form, at least for for the 4 years that they have been elected per term. The fact that a issuance of threat has been made against the President of the United States is not just an issuance of a threat against an American individual, it is an issuance of a threat against the entirety of the United States, and attempting to overturn our democratic process, where we have voted in this president for the next 4 years, and to try and overturn our decisions, and not only that, completely eliminate our representative of the United States. I consider such things as this to be of grave offense to the United States and all of its citizens, and I believe that we should treat it accordingly, and that U.S. military action should be approved against the Islamic Republic of Iran to ensure that such statements and threats are no longer made by the government that's in Iran, because the people who are in this government at the moment will no longer be there after long. Nevertheless, we are going to be moving on outside of that news and on into East Asia for a moment, as we also were able to hear in East Asia, as a side note of news, that the Chinese are now testing out drone swarms. We were actually able to see this on a Chinese social media platform, and it does appear that a large amount of high-altitude drones were flying over the area, at least where this camera person was, apparently operating in unison, possibly an AI drone swarm. Here's the clip. And you see here, the zooming in, you'll see them here in a second. There are these massive amounts small white little dots. Look at them, hundreds of them up there. There's an endless amount of them. It's absolutely crazy to see. And it does appear that this is some sort of an AI-controlled, possibly drone swarm.
That's a hell of a lot of them, too. That's kind of scary to see that, actually. That's like, the coordination behind that is wild.
It is absolutely insane.
And they said they launched all these like mini drones from one big mothership drone. Is that what they were saying before?
I believe that is something that they were saying. We don't really know a lot about this clip or any of the details behind it. All we know is that this is just a massive swarm of Chinese drones that appear to be in some kind of testing somewhere within eastern China. But we really don't know much more about it than that.
Interesting. Well, that's certainly fascinating. I know the U.S. is testing our own version of drones like these, and a little bit of a different variety. But to see these tested right over the skies of China, that's quite wild. Also, look at that bird flying right in the middle of that swarm, too.
Man, we all know that the birds in China are government drones, much like the ones up there high up in the sky. Those actually appear to be near to the cloud layer or above the cloud layer, as a matter of fact. So these things are flying at quite a significant altitude in an incredibly large amount. We don't really know much more about it than that. It just seems as though the Chinese are starting to develop and test some sort of drone launching delivery method, and also using swarm drones as a common practice. Still, an incredibly interesting one nonetheless, and it is starting to show us that the People's Republic of China is evolving their drone strategies and doctrines as rapidly as they are evolving on the front lines in Ukraine. Meanwhile, we have also been able to get some unfortunate news for all of the people here in the channel that really appreciate and enjoy the A-10 Warthog. The A-10 Warthogs, for the 9 gazillionth time, have been given a final retirement date. It looks like they actually are going to be knocked out of service this time, however, as we were able to hear from FlyTix Network that the U.S. Air Force wants to retire its last 162 A-10 Warthogs in the fiscal year of 2026, which is next year, as a part of a plan to divest 340 total aircraft. And that was according to Defense News. The A-10 Warthogs have been an aircraft that has been wildly popular the entire time that they've been in service, at least with the public. It's an incredibly interesting aircraft. They have been in service since 1977, but the aircraft are starting to become fairly dated by most standards. They do not really bode well in any kind of areas that have anything other than pretty much crystal clear skies with absolutely no contested air superiority, meaning that in a modern battle space, these things don't really have a place anymore. We are hearing that apparently all of these A-10 Warthogs will be eventually replaced by F-35 Lightnings, which are, of course, are far more better qualitatively in every degree. They actually are designed more so to fill in the modern battlefield role, but it does appear that the Air Force has given its final stay of execution this last time, and that all the remaining A-10s will be removed from service by the middle part or the latter part of 2026. So it seems as though that is quite interesting, but we are understanding that they will be having pretty significant replacements. Either the F-35 or some form of an F-15E or an F-15EX will most likely be replacing all of the A-10s that are being retired from service, as that generally was the plan from the outset, was that the A-10 was eventually going to be replaced by something. It's just that they didn't know what, and now that the F-35 is around, they generally know exactly what's going to be replacing most of these A-10 Warthogs, and they're either going to be replacing them with F-15s or F-35s. But still, a little bit of an interesting development there, and it does appear that a lot of people are talking about what the future of the A-10 Warthog should be. Its chapter in American military service is finally coming to a close after about 50 years of continuous Air Force service, but a lot of people are saying that the A-10 Warthog has the possibility, or at least the great potential, for a second life somewhere else out there in the world, possibly even in the far-flung regions of Eastern Europe, where the war in Ukraine is still raging, and where our fundraiser is currently raging as well to try and get up to $2.5 thousand, and it's doing an incredibly good job at that. But Matthew, what are people thinking about the future of the A-10, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so it looks like people on the question, should the retired A-10 Warthogs be sent to Ukraine? That's the big question, because right now I think they're set to be scrapped, I believe, but we're really not 100% sure about that. So 55% said yes, Ukraine could use the A-10s very well on the battlefield, while 28% said no, Ukraine is not the best place for it, and 9% said I need more information first. Now, I know initially right off the bat, people were like, well, why not send these to Ukraine? Because, of course, if they're going to be scrapped, let Ukraine at least try to use them the best they can, and let's see how it goes. The only catch with that, though, is they do have to train pilots, and that takes some time and takes a lot of effort, money, and time. We also have to send over the maintenance equipment to maintain this aircraft and train maintainers to actually work on it. And we also have to basically give them places to be able to store them, and then we have to actually transport them over there to Ukraine as well. So there is some back-end auxiliary things that have to be done to actually send these, but between scrapping them and just literally just getting rid of them or sending them to Ukraine, I think it comes down to an issue of, is it worth the cost, basically? Because Ukraine's already using the F-16s very well. The one thing about the A-10s is they're obviously not fighter jets. I believe they're made for ground support. So they do have a very well-built titanium bathtub around the cockpit, but they are more susceptible to air defense fire, at least if my knowledge serves me correctly, which could serve to be an issue on the Ukrainian front lines. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would generally have to say that the A-10, in my opinion, is one of the last aircraft that should be given to the Ukrainians ever. It is generally a death trap in the modern day. I don't want to say that to piss a lot of people off. I know a lot of people think that the A-10 is a great and marvelous plane, but on the flip note, the P-47 Thunderbolt, which the A-10 Thunderbolt II is named after, was also a great and marvelous plane in World War II, but that does not mean that it would stand up in the modern battlefields of today. The A-10 Thunderbolt is an aircraft that was almost obsolete by design when it was introduced in 1977, and just through the great miracle of a decent amount of modernizations, it was able to survive through the Gulf War and on into the invasion of Iraq and through the war in Afghanistan. But in an actual battlefield scenario, in the modern day where there is contested airspace like there would be in Ukraine, of any type, even just manpads for that matter, the A-10 Warthog is an incredibly dangerous aircraft. The only reason why a lot of people say that the thing is armored like a tank is because it does have that titanium bathtub around the pilot, which protects them from ground fire. But not even incredibly large ground fire, mind you. It's generally just higher caliber rifles, but anything bigger than that, it could still punch through the bathtub. Not the rest of the aircraft is unarmored, and also, at least in the Gulf War, these aircraft did get shot down a good bit. Even then, and the Iraqis weren't really known for having the greatest air defense, but still, a decent amount of A-10s did manage to get shot down. I believe they made up about half of the coalition's air losses through the course of the Gulf War, which is the only conflict they've ever been involved in where there was really any air defense at all to be concerned about at any point. Beyond that, the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the war in Afghanistan, there was practically no air defense anywhere, so A-10s could operate practically unimpeded most of the time, and they once again gained a great reputation as a result of that. But the battlefields in Ukraine are totally different, and sending up a Ukrainian pilot in one of these into the battlefields of Ukraine, that would end up probably getting a lot of pilots killed, as a matter of fact. It wouldn't really help the Ukrainians out much, and once again, these aircraft are wildly slow, so if it gets into danger, there's no way for it to get out. On top of that, another interesting thing to point out is that even modern aircraft in Ukraine have an incredibly hard time doing anything of value on the front line, on the Russian side or the Ukrainian side. They have to lob bombs or fire off rockets at an indirect fire support roll angle from miles away from the front lines, pretty much indirectly firing at enemy forces to even stand the chance that the most advanced aircraft available either to Ukraine or to the Russians don't get posed to be shot down by the enemy's air defenses, whichever side that is. And the A-10 Warthog, considering that it is so slow, it could carry rocket pods, so it could be a rocket flinger, but beyond that, there's nothing else that the A-10 Warthog could really do beyond flinging rockets. The main gun would never be used. Not only that, any other sorts of air-to-ground ordnance that the A-10 could carry would also never be used, meaning that beyond this thing getting to fling rockets and technically be an MLRS of a sort, a flying MLRS of a type, it wouldn't really do much more than that. It just is just way too vulnerable to ground fire. It's too slow. It's just not good enough for them. I would honestly say that sending these to Ukraine would be more of a detriment than it would be a help, because a lot of promising Ukrainian pilots would probably take their last flights in these A-10s, and they would generally get shot down relatively easily. So I would say, I wouldn't want to do it. I would have to be with the majority that I generally wouldn't want to send these, at least in my opinion. But with that, I hope that addresses that somewhat well, at least to me. I think, honestly, folks, if we were to give them anything, I think we should just continue to give them more F-16s. The F-16s have done pretty well from what we've been told. Like, they're not doing incredibly bad. The Ukrainians don't use them much, but they've done quite well. These aircraft can pretty much do everything that the A-10 Warthog does, but better. It's still about as old as a system. It's just that the F-16 has really stood up to the test of time far better than any A-10 Warthog could. The F-16, from what I know, still is going to be in service probably on up into the 2040s, and the A-10's getting retired just next year. So that kind of tells you all how much better the F-16 is compared to the A-10, because even the most advanced Air Force in the world doesn't want to get rid of the F-16s until they're about 60 years old, at least in service, and are gray in the whiskers for the large part of that point. So hopefully, we'll be able to see that more F-16s are given to them that are either being retired out of U.S. Air Force service or are being retired from other European countries, and the United States can just continue to supply a great deal of spare parts and ordnance for the F-16s to use and not give them a death trap like an A-10 Warthog. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, about the future of the A-10 and what we should do with them. I think those things belong in the Tucson Boneyard to just sit out there and kind of just hang out until someone needs them or other spare parts are needed for something else somewhere. Although I would really doubt that anyone would need spare parts for an A-10. No one really wants them. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address it the best I can in my opinion. And moving on from that and into some follow-ups of the news from yesterday, we have also been able to hear of the satellite pictures that came out from the Marinovka airfield near to the area of Volgograd. We actually did see that several Su-34s were splattered onto the tarmac. We can actually see them here in the satellite picture, both in, I believe it is infrared as well as on the actual tarmac itself. And we were able to confirm that 2 Su-34s were completely destroyed, and another 2 were severely damaged to the point they've pretty much been knocked out of action. So in general, we do understand that the attack at the Marinovka Air Base was incredibly significant and did cause a decent amount of damage to the Russian Air Forces and their fighter-bomber units that are within that area of the Marinovka airfield. But still, it does appear that at the moment, the United States, well, the state of Ukraine has been able to land another significant blow to the Russian Federation's armed forces, and once again to ensure that the Russian Air Force will not be able to pull off the kind of air operations that they have been in the past, or at least all of the air operations that they want to, at least at this point. But with that, it is now time for us to finally move on into Ukraine and what's been going on the front lines here. But before we do, though, I do have to say that our fundraiser has reached $1.8 thousand, and it's getting incredibly close to hitting the fundraiser goal. It's actually moving pretty quickly tonight. So hopefully, folks, we can see a lot of support to hit the $2.5 thousand fundraiser goal, which we have for our fundraiser for Nova Ukraine. Hopefully, people will be able to hit that because it helps out in Ukraine a great deal through the Nova Ukraine nonprofit. So a huge shout out to all of y'all so far. And also, we do have more news coming on from out of Ukraine as well. And moving on into the area of Western Ukraine, we have been able to see that the refinery was hit. Also, by the way, Matthew, I got to tell you, those little mints, they did nothing for me. I am like struggling over here. But we have been able to hear that a refinery was hit within the area of Western Ukraine, just to the southwest of Lviv, about 20 miles away just tonight.
Ракети нахуй, йди до малого, блядь. Тут хуярить пиздец, нахуй. Є, ракета летить, блядь. Ліля, готуйся. Раз, блядь.
And we actually see the Russian missile coming in and hitting the refinery.
Перша впала, друга пішла. Третя засвітила.
We can actually see multiple impacts. From what we understand, this is a larger oil refinery inside of the state of Ukraine. It does appear to have taken several direct hits by Russian cruise missiles, and it may have been knocked out as a result. We do not know if any repairs are going to be affected at any point in the future, but it is quite clear as a result of this footage that the Russian Federation was able to land a significant attack within the region of western Ukraine.
О, бля. Вся хуєнна. Перепрошую. Ох, їде до малого скоро. О, сова полетіла. Сов в димах. Все чорне, пів Дрогобича накрило. То все не дерева, то все дим.
That's the end of the clip right there, but still showing us what was going on within western Ukraine just recently. We were able to hear that there was a significant missile and drone attack overnight, comprised of hundreds of drones and missiles. From what I was able to hear, it seems as though there's about 530 to 540 missiles and drones that were launched overnight, and we could see that a lot of them were attempting to target and hit a couple of key places, most particularly the city of Dnipro, Mykolaiv, Lviv, and the refinery that we just saw in the clip recently. We were able to record impacts and hits in every single one of those locations, and you also can see the flight paths of the different types of missiles and varieties that were launched and fired overnight. And it was a very significant number, and the Ukrainian air defense did claim that a large number of these were shot down, and here are the numbers that we had so far from overnight. We were able to hear that 537 drones and missiles were fired over the course of the night. We were then able to hear that 249 of those were directly shot down, and 226 of them were also taken down through electronic warfare interference, meaning that in total, 475 out of the 537 drones and missiles that were fired were shot down. But that also means that even with that amazing number, about 60 or so missiles and drones did make it through the air defense and ended up hitting their targets, which is a pretty significant number, even with the air defense interception rate being that high. This is one of the largest air attacks that we have seen so far conducted by the Russian Federation, and we're seeing that a lot of it's being reinforced and bolstered through the fact that they are starting to implement a wide variety or sweeping number of mass-produced Geron 2 drones made inside the Russian Federation to be used against the state of Ukraine, which we're seeing in this attack like we did last night. It also is starting to show us that the Ukrainian air defense is going to have to start becoming larger and more robust, and most likely more cost-efficient at the same time, to be able to deal with this over a sustained period, as these sorts of attacks in their size and scope are becoming a lot more common and prolific at this point in the conflict, which is showing that the Russian Federation, much like the Ukrainians, are attempting to win the war through attrition, simply destroying the enemy's war industries and abilities to conduct economic commerce, and through that, hopefully creating an economic collapse which will threaten the continuance of the war itself, either on the Ukrainian or the Russian side. But it does appear that a lot of people have been talking about these massive drone attacks that have been conducted, and also the drone attacks that the Ukrainians have conducted, which we'll be getting to here in a second. But Matthew, what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So we are seeing here some very large Ukrainian drone attacks over the last couple of days. And the poll says we have seen new Ukrainian drone attacks striking Crimea and Kursk today, and major explosions were visible. And we'll watch those videos here in just a second. And what are your thoughts about these attacks? So 67% said Ukraine is ramping up attacks once again, while 20% said it seems like status quo, nothing's really changed. And 5% said Ukraine's attacks are becoming less common. And I would say I'm with the 68%. Ukraine is ramping up their attacks because they have a brand new drone weapon. I guess you could say a new military toy that they're using on the Russians, and it appears to be extremely effective. They're new jet-powered drones, these Peklo missile-style drones, more like loitering munitions, and also they have other ones, other variants of them as well. So they're ramping up the attacks to take advantage of that new technology while they have it, and while the Russians are still not adapting to it right now. Because I suspect it's going to be a while before the Russians develop a really good countermeasure to these new jet drones, and they're trying to take advantage while they have that edge. So I'm with the 68%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that the Ukrainians do sound like they're ramping up the drone attacks again. It does appear that they're attempting to target and hit key targets throughout the Russian Federation, military and economic, and they're attempting to try and draw the Russian Federation into a tough economic stance or situation, or a tough military situation due to their lack of supplies, to be able to try and force an end to the conflict. So it does appear that the Ukrainians are ramping up these attacks again, as we see that time is continuing to pass. I feel like I'm talking gibberish tonight, folks. A lack of coffee really does make it incredibly hard to focus on these things, but With that, it is time for us to move on down into the Ukrainian attacks that we've also been able to hear about, as we were able to see Russian air defense firing in response to the Ukrainian drone attack that was occurring inside of Crimea, with the footage being seen right here. Now we hear the Ukrainian drones flying over and hitting their target.
Oh, блядь.
Ты хочешь сказать, сбил его? Да, он упал.
Нет, он упал.
Он упал.
Пизда, слышь, ебать.
Вы сняли?
Да.
Ебать, да, ну нахуй. Ебать, мой хуй.
Ебать воняет, слышь.
Блядь, давить нахуй. Сейчас тут все горит, наверное, все.
That's the end of the clip right there, but still showing us the attack that occurred in Crimea recently. Outside of that, and inside the area of Lvov, we also were able to confirm that Ukrainian attacks hit here, most likely around a troop staging area, which we've seen attacked previously as well. Here's the clips.
О, сейчас бахнет, сейчас бахнет.
That's the end of that clip. Moving on into our next one, we also got to see another clip of the explosion seen right here. That's the end of that clip as well. But moving on into our next clips, we also were able to see more explosions inside of Lviv in these clips right here. Or I mean Lvov, correction. And there you can see the quick flash, and it does appear that the Ukrainians were targeting and attempting to hit another Russian staging area, because we have been able to see that along the entirety of the highway within this area of the Kursk Oblast, heading towards Lvov on the E38, that there are significant troop staging areas in Lvov, as well as in the town of Marino, and also the town of Rilisk as well, which we've seen the Ukrainians systematically targeting and attempting to destroy over the course of the past few months. It appears that these attacks are an extension of that, and it is once again showing us that the Ukrainian armed forces are attempting to cause as much damage as they physically can against the Russian Federation's armed forces inside of the Kursk Oblast. But before we get on into the rest of our news tonight, I do have to say that we have a lot of people to talk about. We have been able to see that the fundraiser's been doing wildly well. We've actually hit about $2,000 tonight so far, and I can tell you folks that it's been an amazing thing to see so far. Hopefully we'll be able to hit that past those last $500 to the $2.5 thousand goal. But Matthew, I understand that we have a lot of amazing folks who support this fundraiser so far tonight. And who are those folks? Who are those amazing folks, man? They're the top donors.
All right, so we got some mega donors tonight coming in here and absolutely hauling butt on this fundraiser. And right now we're sitting at $1,982 raised. We're about $500 or so away from smashing the goal, so we were getting super close. But to give a shout out to our top donors of the night, we did have a $333 donation from Hal Rose, the largest one of the night. And huge shout to Hal for that generosity.
Dang.
We also had a $250 from Don Edwards, also a massive one. Then we had a $100 from Just Chillin', as well as Barky Bark Dog, as well as a $50 from Samuel Sizamonski, Snow White. Also a $50 from Flat Effin' Broke, who they're apparently not as broke as they thought. They threw in a $50. And also we do have a $50 from Charles Hazlitt as well. And we are doing very swell right now in the fundraiser, and a huge shout out to our top donors of the night and everybody else that donated as well. We would love to call all of y'all off, but unfortunately though, we would be here all night if we did that and probably run off the majority of the viewers that are here for the news. So we do appreciate every single one of you, because with all that support to the fundraiser, this is possible. So thank you all very much for that. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I'd have to say a huge thanks and a shout out to all of y'all for supporting the fundraiser. Whether we were able to call off your names or not, y'all's support is absolutely incredible and helping us to continue to support the state of Ukraine and Western American interests around the world, as we've been able to support and help out a lot of nonprofits over the years. And it's an amazing, wonderful thing to know that we were once again able to see that tonight and hopefully be able to hit that fundraiser goal here incredibly soon. Also, really quickly, I've seen some people saying some very crazy things in the chat that you have to pay to have a question answered here. And the answer to that is no, you do not have to pay. As a matter of fact, we don't make a cent tonight. We're working for free. That's right, folks. We work 7 hours a day, every Sunday for free. So that way folks like Alan Matthews and Nicholas Condor can put us over the goal. Holy smokes.
My God.
Look at that. Look at that.
Jaga. Igor, that's insane. We literally just had like $700 come in between Alan Matthews and Nicholas Conder in like less than 30 seconds. That is wild, and we have smashed the goal as of right now. That is insane.
And I got to say, an absolutely incredible thing. We just hit the fundraiser goal. Nicholas Condor threw in a $250, and Alan Matthews threw in the largest donation of the night, $500. A massive thanks to both of y'all, because y'all just got us over the fundraiser goal there just a moment ago. And it's an absolutely incredible and amazing thing to see. The Lee Spring Army continues to support Western and American interests around the world every single day and every single night, including tonight. So massive thanks to both of y'all so much once again, and everyone else has been supporting the fundraiser so far tonight, because y'all have made it possible again for the Lee Spring Army to say that the Lee Spring Army will never truly die and will continue to support Western American interests in every way that it can. And so with that, we are going to be moving on into some live chat questions. We're going to be grabbing three I say, and then we'll be moving on through the rest of our news, the speech from Zelensky, and then getting on back into a little question segment for a little bit. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so jumping to our first live chat question of the night, this one goes to Ryan Kiernan. And Ryan said, at this point, what do you think World War III would even look like if it does break out? And one CIA medium predicts it will be allied with Russia versus China. Far-fetched, but a curious concept. And also, Ryan, are you referring to like a medium as in like a fortune teller or something? Because I'm not aware that the CIA has any of those anymore. They had them back in the day, I think like 30 or 40 years ago, but I don't think they have them anymore. So if that's the source of the CIA information right there, I would take that with a grain of salt right there. Being allied with Russia or China would literally flip the world order on its head. So I don't know about that one. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that the United States ever teaming up with the Chinese is a proposition that will never happen. Ever. That would make no sense. Also, why in the world would the United States trade Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and Canada, just to name the major allied powers here in the West, for Russia, which is a shithole, and China, which is a glorified shithole? It doesn't, like that statement from a CIA medium doesn't make any sense. I think that they ought to stick to palm reading before they get into global affairs, because I don't think they know much about it. But as far as I would say,
the CIA actually had like what they called them remote viewers, but they were basically like people that claimed to be psychic of some ability. They actually ran like multi-million-dollar projects about 30 or 40 years ago. The CIA did, to experiment with remote viewing to see if they could predict future points of aggression of other countries and things like that. The results were inconclusive. Like pretty clearly they were. I think people kind of knew that going into it, but they spent millions though on it, and they actually tried it.
They tried it, and then they figured out that it wasn't real. Those people, they don't know what they're talking about, because it takes a decent bit of knowledge to even just predict with decent accuracy, like we do here on this channel, what's going to happen 2 weeks from now. If someone is telling you that they can sit there and flip over some playing cards with some neat little pictures on them and tell you what's going to be happening in 5 years from now, those people are freaking psychotic. They need some help, because there's no way that they could do that. So if a CIA medium wants to say that, they're stupid. Like they're stupid, and they're maybe crazy. But as far as what a world war would look like, let's go off of what we're seeing right now, and let's try and work with that, because I don't like working in like the where I think that stuff is called esoteric or something like that. I don't like to work in that sort of funny business. I consider the stuff to be just, it's like a children's book fantasy sort of a thing. It's like Dungeons and Dragons stuff. Like we're about to go and become Conan the Barbarian and go read. We're going to ask the soothsayer to throw some chicken feet on the table and figure out what's going to be happening with the Russians. Like if we're going to work our foreign policy off of that, we might as well just have a whole bunch of take some chimpanzees from the zoo, throw them on some typewriters, and wait for them to write Shakespeare, because that would probably produce better results than a soothsayer telling us what the foreign policy is going to look like. But as far as how it'll work now, let's say that we're working with the world we're in at the moment. World War, let's say everything kicked off at the same time, or everything kicked off within the next year or two. Let's go with that, and let's say what it would look like. So, China is going to attempt to invade Taiwan. Definite certainty. It's going to happen at some point in the future. We just don't know when. So let's say that all of these things are once again happening at the same time. So China would attempt to invade Taiwan. We have to be present there and help to defend the Taiwanese against the Chinese attack. Then we're also going to see that within India and Pakistan, there's an ongoing battle there. The Chinese will pick the side of Pakistan. We'll most likely de facto pick the side of India. Then inside the Middle East, the Israelis and the Iranians keep going at it, but it doesn't stop. And then we have to go down there and we have to largely fix the problem. Then with the Russians, it's pretty much what we're seeing right now. It's just that they extend the war to the Baltics and Finland and Poland as well. So pretty much it's just a European-wide war instead of the Ukraine war that we're seeing at the moment. That's generally what a world war would look like at the moment. Those are all of the major flashpoints, the battlefields. You wouldn't really see much of anything happening elsewhere, and some of them would be a lot easier resolved than one would believe. The only thing you'd have to do in the Middle East to end that conflict is pretty much wipe out Khameini and the top levels of the Iranian government. It's over at that point. They pretty much would cease to exist. There would be such a massive power vacuum there. They would be tied up with the domestic struggles from that point on before they would ever even try and strike at the Israelis or the U.S. again. So the Middle East becomes an open and shut book at that moment. Outside of that, the war with the Russians would be a lot tougher, not because the Russian military is formidable, it's just that they have nuclear weapons. So while we could beat their military quite easily, they still have the nuclear weapons to fall back on, and that's the thing that they know that they can do. With the Chinese are actually the only one that's truly formidable. We would never get directly involved with India and Pakistan, we would just materially support the Indians, and that would be about it. But with the Chinese, they're actually the ones that are incredibly formidable, because they pretty much possess most, if not all, of the real actionable naval power that the Axis powers would have. The Chinese have all of it. So we would have to deal with the Chinese Navy, or more so Chinese submarines, which would be a significant threat. And then we would also have to deal with trying to conduct air operations and air defenses of the island of Taiwan, which would also be a considerable challenge as well, considering that it's incredibly close to China, but the United States is all the way across the Pacific of course, North America, and we would have to have some sort of supply chain from the continental United States all the way through the Pacific to be able to continue to supply our forces in that area. That's generally what a world war would look like. I could not see it going any other way, because you would literally have to do so many things to get the United States to be allies with Russia and China. It just could not happen in a single few years. It could never happen, as a matter of fact. So I generally have to say, I thank you for an interesting question, Ryan Kieran. But as far as ever taking a soothsayer's words for anything, I count them for nothing ever. Like it's an interesting idea, but that's just it. It's just interesting, but not at all reality. It's kind of like that.
Well,
time.
I think they used them like they didn't use them to like necessarily predict like the entire like outcome of an event. They would use them to get like intel leads. Like they'd sort of use these people that were called remote viewers as way to find leads to more intel, so that way they could kind of know where to look. I can't really remember exactly what the results were like of the actual studies, but overall, though, it was not reliable to a very high degree. It actually worked sometimes. Some people were like better at it than others, but that could be merely like statistics or pure chance. So that's the problem why it was inconclusive, because they couldn't make that determination.
Yeah, that's true. But then again, at the same time, folks, I hope a lot of people know this, but the soothsayers, the mediums, and all that, they pull a lot of psychological tricks that pretty much make you fill in the answers that you want to hear. So it always seems like they're saying something that's right, because they'll always talk in incredibly vague terms, and they're pretty much trying to get it out of you. So they'll sit there and do the little goofy rituals or whatever, and then they'll sit there and say, "I'm hearing someone close to you, something bad that happened recently." You're gonna fill in all the blanks mentally in your head, and then you're gonna go, "Wait a minute, are you talking about Timmy? Are you talking about Timmy who died?" Yes, it's Timmy. It's Timmy. Something terrible happened to him. He's screaming about, "Oh my God, the car crash and the fire that he burned up in. Oh my, yes, Timmy who died in the car crash."
But
and the
you
fire."
see,
And they do the psychological trick, but you're pretty much filling in all the answers for him.
But these people were actually like drawing like things on paper. Like they weren't necessarily saying things. Like for example, I think in one of the experiments, if I recall properly, they had one of these people sit down and they would have someone like prime them with information that they had, general information, and then they would tell this remote viewing person to sit down with a piece of paper, and they would start drawing out like a scene of something or whatever they like popped in their mind first, if I have this properly. And they would start drawing it, and occasionally they would draw something that kind of matched up with something that was of interest. They would look into it, and then they would allegedly find something that backed up the remote viewing junk. I'll be honest with you. It comes across as me as like some type of pseudoscience or some junk like that. And the people that engage in it, I don't know, like their beliefs are a little bit out there, like the people that are engaging this type of stuff. And the CIA back in the day, they were like grasping for straws for anything they could. They were trying to get a one-up on the Russians. The Russians were also experimenting with that as well, these psychic type people like this. And they were trying to find ways to get a one-up advantage on the Russians in case it actually worked. So there was no proof it actually worked. It was just tests and experiments that cost millions of dollars.
But the thing is, folks, this is also the truth as well. Statistically, if you put enough monkeys on a typewriter and you just let them type, eventually one of them is going to write a Shakespeare. The odds of it are incredibly tough. Like it's a 1 in billions, but they will eventually do it. And then when one monkey actually writes Shakespeare, then some people are going to say, "Oh my God, monkeys are actually intelligent and they are smart enough to be able to write Shakespeare." It will happen, and at some point, one of those people, the medium readers or whatever the CIA was calling them, is going to get something close to being right, or it's going to be near to dead right, and then people will be going, "Wow." Like everyone else got it wrong, but this one guy got it right, so maybe there is something to it. Or people will just say, "Oh, I believe it now. It's like real." But they will completely forget the mountain of times that these people got the stuff wrong. And that's probably why it was inconclusive, is that there was a mountain of times they got it wrong, but a few of them got it right. And then they're like, okay, maybe there's a little bit of something to it, but at the same time, this has absolutely no merit to it whatsoever. And that's also why they dropped it as well. Because if it was a dead-on process where it was guaranteed right, they would have kept it around. They wouldn't have gotten rid of it. But it wasn't that done during the times of Alan Dulles, Matthew? Like, wasn't that done back then when he was the director?
I think so. It was that weird time when the CIA like pretty much took the gloves off. At one point,
Yeah.
they realized the CIA got freaked out because there were some things that we got caught off guard by that the Russians were developing. So the CIA went into like freak out mode. They were like, "Oh my God, like we're falling behind. We need to start doing anything we can to get like an edge on the Russians." Like, and they went berserk. And that's why you saw atrocities start happening, like during the psychological experiments on people that they conducted. Is because it wasn't necessarily because the CIA was wanting to hurt people. It was because they wanted to find an edge over the Russians, and they started justifying these horrific experiments with a national security like background behind it. So that's why it went berserk like that. But yeah, it was generally around that time.
Dude, remember when the CIA was trying to take out Castro during that time? And they're like, "Yeah, we'll put a bomb in a conch shell and put it on the bottom of the sea, so that way when he goes diving, he'll pick it up and it'll blow up." And then he never picked it up. He swam right by it. And he didn't pick it up, and they're like, "Dang it!" And then they tried to poison the milkshake, and then he was like, "Oh, actually, you know what? I'm good. I don't want a milkshake." And they're like, "Damn it!" And they kept doing crazy stuff, and nothing was working. I think if I remember, folks, the CIA tried to kill Castro 300 or so times, and every single time it failed. And it didn't fail because they were ever uncovered. It just failed because literally at that very moment, it was kind of like how the log comes flying down on like a latch coming straight for someone. If it hits him, it's going to kill him, and the guy like bends over to pick something up and the log goes flying right over him, misses him. That was pretty much most of every time that they attempted to kill Castro, it ended up like that. But it was a crazy time back then in the CIA. I mean, they were feeding people LSD and stuff to just see what would happen. But
That time actually honestly disgraceful time in the history of that organization, because they really did a number on some really unsuspecting people. That I think they went back and tried to like rectify it later on, but of course, when your loved one happens to be a paraplegic because of an experiment, that money doesn't do much good at that point. So not a bright point for sure.
Yeah, also, I did hear, Matthew, at the time that they actually used Wile E. Coyote as a training video for possible applicable tactics in the field on how to deal with people. Like the rockets, the anvils, that sort of a deal.
Are you joking?
No, yeah, I'm I'm joking.
Okay, I was
Yes.
about to say, oh, this is crazy.
You're like, really? Like, it's believable because of what they were doing. Like, it was just crazy stuff. But anyways, with that, I hope I addressed that question well. But yeah, the soothsayer thing, I just don't really buy it too much. The CIA didn't buy it. That's why they dropped it. But anyways, with that, everyone's like, really? Like, it's actually believable because of the goofy stuff they did? No, actually, the CIA didn't use Roadrunner or Wile E. Coyote as, like, training videos. They never did that. I was just kidding about that as a joke. That never happened, though. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next question here is going to go to none other than AF Kaplan, who said, "Have you heard anything about the U.S. government lifting sanctions against the Russians?"
No. We've actually extended all of we've extended all of the Biden era sanctions into next year under the current president. The president authorized that. So right now, all of the sanctions that we've had against the Russians are still in place against the Russians, and there's considerations of putting even more on them. Although, for some reason, while we are perfectly fine with extending the current regimen of sanctions, the current president is hesitant about applying further sanctions. I have no idea why. I generally feel like it would be appropriate at the moment, but that's generally the situation right now. And so I hope that does address that well, at least the best I can. And with that, we are on to the final question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news.
All right, and this one goes to Run and Gunny. Also, by the way, I want to correct somebody real quick. Someone said they did not stop remote viewing. You're ignorant of CIA ops. They did stop the Stargate project. It was officially ended at some year, decades ago. I can't remember the exact year, but it was formally ended. So actually, you don't know what you're talking about. But jumping to our question here, this one goes to Run and Gunny, who said, "Do you think that Mossad is still internal and tracking the Iranian leaders inside of Iranian space?"
Oh, absolutely. They certainly are. I mean, the fact that there are explosions still going on in Iran, on government officials' houses, specific apartment blocks, such things, it's showing that there are Mossad operatives on the ground. And considering that the Israelis had a massive ring of them during the Israel-Iran war that were on the ground active, they're still there and they're still conducting their operations. A lot of those agents were not involved in the attacks that were going on during the Iran-Israel war, or at least the hot part of that conflict. They were probably still just keeping a low profile so that way once it ended, they could still be in the country conducting their operations as usual. So the answer to that is absolutely yes. They are on the ground and they are observing the great deal of Iranian officials that are there at the moment. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And that's the first time I've ever heard Matthew go out of his way to say, "You're wrong." Like, I was like, dang, man. I was like, listen to that.
That's like a verifiable fact, though. I mean, that one right there, I could literally pull it up for you right now if you wanted to, and literally show you the date it ended. I mean, there's some things that are debatable, and then there's some things that are like crazy conspiracy theories. It's like, if there's clearly an end date on the project and they got rid of the people the researchers on the project, I mean, obviously they ended the project. Now, if they're still using some of the techniques, that's questionable or not, but they ended the project that actually started the whole thing.
Yeah. Also, I see some people are like, "Oh, they're totally wrong about this and that with the CIA stuff." Look, folks, I gotta share something with y'all. The CIA isn't like this magical boogeyman anymore. Like, yes, they still do very questionable stuff. It's an intelligence agency. They're going to do questionable stuff. But as far as doing goofy stuff like feeding people LSD and putting them into rooms and in MK Ultra and stuff, those days are past. Because back then, that was when the CIA was brand new, and that's also when they had Looney Tunes McGee, Alan Dulles in charge, who was going, "Let's do everything crazy under the sun just to figure out what's going on and what works and what doesn't." They generally figured out a lot of what works and what doesn't work, and then they threw away the stuff that doesn't work, which is most of the crazy stuff that has been published these days. Are they still doing crazy stuff? Yeah, they are. It's just that we don't know about it. But it's not absolutely crazy stuff like they were doing back then. Like going to, say a wagon on the side of the street and going inside and going, "Can you read tarot cards? Can you tell us where the Russians are at?" They're not doing that anymore. That just was found out to not work. So if it didn't work back then, why the hell would they still have them around today, and why in the world would they be using them? That would make no sense. It's like, yeah, this didn't work back in the 60s. Well, let's just keep that going for another 70 years, and maybe it'll work eventually. No, they're not going to do that. That's a waste of money. They got better ways to use the money elsewhere. Like, making someone go out to behind the Russian barracks and, sift through all of the classified documents they use as toilet paper and see if there's anything valuable on them. That has worth, doing something like that. Doing something with the soothsayers has no worth, and it's costing too much money. So that's generally how it would work. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news. And we do have a decent amount of additional news, as we have been able to hear that we also got to see a Ukrainian Mi-8 shooting down a Shahed drone. You see the cameraman trying to get a better view. Oh, and there goes the Shahed.
Oh, look at that.
And there it goes.
They didn't actually shoot it down?
They shot it down. It went out of control. That's why it went into the uncontrolled dive.
Okay, it looked like it was on its final descent, like a planned descent there for a second.
Oh no, that thing was out of control. Like that thing was spinning. That's why you heard it go because it was actually spinning around in air. So you're getting kind of like the Doppler effect. But anyways, with that, we are going to be moving on into the Sumy Oblast, where we got to hear that the Ukrainians are making more ground. We were able to hear that they are pushing the Russians back at Alexievka in the Sumy area. We also get to see that they are making a decent dent into the Russian lines and starting to split it almost into two. We also got to see a little bit of additional news today where the artillery was hitting the Russian forces and causing a decent amount of damage. Take a look. This is the 8th Brigade's work.
Oh, wow,
boom.
the 8th Brigade coming in with the A+ on the paper, it looks like. They did some work, putting their back into it. Ah, yes, very expensive radar. Look at that.
Dude, I just found this silly website because I had to go pull up. Does the CIA use psychic mediums? And dude, it's some goofy websites like the conspiracy websites, and they're like, yes, the CIA uses psychics to talk to dead agents to get more information from them. I'm like, okay, this is goofy. Nope.
Yikes.
The CIA is out there, man. They're like, damn, I hate to hear that Agent Ronald is dead. Pull out the Ouija board. We got to ask him a question. Like they're really doing that.
Oh, jeez. I don't think they want to go back and talk to some of those agents. I think they would rather they not say anything else. Oh, look at this. This guy is crawling into the wrong vehicle at the wrong time.
Yeah. Oh, these guys are on the motorcycle. These guys are on the car. We can see them hitting a Bohanka, also hitting some tank traps. Suffice it to say, the Kursk front is a pretty gruesome front at the moment. I mean, they are absolutely catching a lot of these guys off guard. I don't know how they're not hearing the drone, because we've heard these in clips before, and they are quite loud from a distance.
Also, by the way, Snow White said, I want nothing to do with that spooky stuff. Honestly, I don't either. Like, I wouldn't touch that stuff with a 10-foot pole. I was trying not to get too deep into it, but honestly, it's like, that remote viewing junk starts getting into a little bit of that, witchcraft type junk. Yeah, cult witchcraft type junk. I'm not a fan of that junk. Even if it worked, I wouldn't want to employ that. Because it just seems a little bit something that we probably shouldn't be messing with. But, the CIA was looking for anything, so they didn't care if it was the devil, if it was, whoever. They just wanted something. They didn't care who they needed to speak to make it happen.
Man, imagine the director of the CIA. He's like, how's the operation going? Well, so-and-so got killed trying to, get some classified documents. Damn it. And then he, whips out a Ouija board and he starts doing the little stuff with it. And they're like, sir, what are you doing? I'm trying to contact him. We got many questions. It's like, nah, they're not doing that. It's like, man, that's just not happening. That's just fantasy stuff.
The one thing that got me really spooked about it is one of the people who used to be a remote viewer did a podcast a while ago. They're much older now, obviously, because it happened a long time ago. But they were asked about, and I'm not making any comments, so if anyone wants to go berserk, don't go berserk. But they were asked about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and the person had a reaction that was very, very odd. They would not speak. They literally would not even utter a word in response to that question. And they simply shook their head and got freaked out. And the interviewer had to move on to another question because the person was so freaked out. And I was like, okay, there we go. That's not a good look.
A little odd, I would personally say.
Yeah, a little odd.
But that's the end of the clip. And moving on from that and further down the way and into our location unknowns, we have quite a many. First, we were able to see some Ukrainian helicopters flying low. Very low. Take a look at that.
Oh,
and that truck almost got him. Hey, dang. And that's the end of those clips. But moving on from that and on into our next clip, we also got to see a Russian armored train. A real Russian armored train.
Is that a real one right there? Now, that looks like North Korea's armored train a little bit, slightly.
This is a real armored train. They actually have a stationary mounted BMP on it for autocannon fire. I've never seen this before, as a matter of fact. You can actually see the engine is right behind it, right there, with armor plating around it. This is
That seems like
absolutely
that's not going to last long. I'm not going to lie. Like this is not like North Korea's train. Actually, this looks like a joke. This is like that German train they tried to put in Call of Duty. That one that like took out in that one Call of Duty thing or
Oh yeah,
whatever.
the one
They
I
had to
was
like chase
watching.
down to the train. Yeah, it looks like that. Looks like that in real life.
I'll be honest with you. I don't think this thing is effective. I'll just say up front. I think this is a dated concept for a bygone era, to be entirely honest. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents on it, at least at the moment. But oh yeah, the enemy is bringing in a behemoth. The enemy, dude, it's Battlefield 1. The enemy is bringing in an armored train. It's like, nah, this ain't working anymore. Also, it's got no armor practically, so you can kiss it goodbye if it ever gets threatened too much. But anyways, we
If
also
a
got,
foamer tried to fight a war, that's what would happen.
dude. Honestly, though, I respect it, but at the same time, I don't. Like I respect it for being a train. I do not respect it for the fact it's just it's strategically obsolete and tactically obsolete. Makes no sense. But moving on from that, we also got to see the armor for a Patriot system. The Ukrainians are trying to make impromptu armor.
Oh,
It's interesting.
that's not a bad idea. Is this covering like what part of the Patriot system actually?
That I don't know. They blurred out so much, I can't really tell what system this is in the Patriot battery to say.
Interesting. It looks like they just added like some type of like just really thick metal covering to it. It's kind of interesting. I heard they had their largest metallurgical company working on this in Ukraine to try to get it functional quick. So it looks like they're in good hands.
It looks like they're in good hands, like Allstate. But we also got to see that a Leopard was prepping for combat, and the clip was just cool. And we're going to have to mute it. But there is the Ukrainian armored up Leopard 2 at Contact 1 ERA, the flaps, the whole kit and caboodle.
That
It
thing is
actually
low
looks
riding
really
there.
cool.
Look at that. Man, bending corners and everything.
Man, look at it go.
Oh, this turret's turned the wrong way.
Man, they just testing her out. They just making sure it's ready to go.
They're trying to have the cameraman go to the bathroom out here, apparently.
They're trying to fertilize the fields, one cameraman at a time. And I mean, correction, folks, for that. The cameraman's going to get so scared he'll poop. I don't mean that they're going to, like, turn him into a fine mist. Not at all. But anyways, moving on from that and into our next bit of location unknown news, we got the Russian casualty report. And holy smokes, everyone, look at this. Look at this. And Miss DC, keeper of the record, stated the troop losses are up, but the June total will be the lowest month in the past year. Drones will be a record month, and tanks and AFVs are down to 2023 levels, showing a major shift in the war. And Miss Disa is absolutely correct, as we were able to hear that 1,220 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 7 APCs, 93 supply trucks, 6 main battle tanks, 24 artillery pieces, 147 drones, and that was it. Still a pretty decent day, and great to see. Also, it appears that some people are saying in the chat, apparently, that the Idaho situation is finally over with, which is good to hear. I also want to
They
add
found him
this.
dead. They found him dead in the woods. But it's unclear if the police took him out or he took himself out. I think he might have. I think he might have gone out on his own accord.
Interesting. Well, it's a good thing that it's over finally, because that was crazy to hear. I don't know if y'all heard about it. I'll give y'all a little bit of a brief synopsis. Earlier today, there was a fire that broke out just to the east of Coeur d'Alene. Firefighters went up there to put out the wildfire, and they got fired on. I believe a couple of the firefighters ended up getting shot and killed, and I believe a couple of police officers did as well. It's an incredibly unfortunate thing. But it was a serious situation. They were having to bring in the FBI, a whole bunch of stuff. Apparently, there was multiple attackers inside of the hills. A really crazy thing. You don't hear about this kind of stuff often, at least in America. And what's even more interesting, this was kind of something a little bit eerie, is that at a time not too long ago, Coeur d'Alene was actually an option for Enforcer HQ 3.0, and this happened right outside of one of the old options. It was ruled out about a month ago, quietly behind the scenes, but this was actually an option for Enforcer HQ 3.0. But a very unfortunate thing to hear about the passing of the firefighters and the police officers that ended up getting shot and killed up there in the hills outside of Coeur d'Alene. We feel incredibly sorry for all those folks and the family members that they've left behind, because it's a very sad and unfortunate thing to think that some deranged people would conduct such a sick action as that to try and take out firefighters, especially that were going up there to try and put out a blaze to protect the thousands of people living in the city just below the mountains. And then also the police officers who responded to try and protect and help out the firefighters that were under attack. But still, with that, I hope I summarized that information for y'all somewhat well. Just a sad series of events to hear about all together. But with that, we are going to be moving on into the rest of our frontline news in Ukraine. And moving on up into the Kupiansk area, we were able to hear of Russian forces getting slammed by fiber optic drones, which we can see in this clip right here. They hit the Squid Game van. Then they went and targeted a couple of Russian vehicles traveling on around.
See a lot of people speculating about what it could have been that caused that lunatic piece of crap to start doing what he did up there in Idaho. I have doubts that it was Iranian backed. Like personally, we don't know any details right now, so it's kind of hard to tell. But Idaho is known for having some very bad groups that operate from the backwoods of Idaho, and I'm not sure how close they operate to like towns and town centers like Coeur d'Alene, however you pronounce it. But those groups are present there. It's a little bit concerning. And there's also been like law enforcement run-ins with those people up there quite a bit as well. So we're not sure which one it is. It could be Iranian, or it could be just a domestic nutcase that decided to carry out a bad plan.
And it does appear so. And that's the end of those clips there, still showing us the damage that the Ukrainians were able to inflict onto the Russian armed forces. Moving further on down towards the Bakhmut region, we also got to see the Ukrainians dropping actual artillery shells onto the Russians. These appear to be quite effective. Take a gander. And there we go. Quite effective, actually. And that's the end of that clip. And moving on from that and on into the next one, we also get to see further down near to Toretsk, the Russians getting hit.
I like how those drones just have a way of going right through the glass like that. Look at that. Blowing up a little smoke, so you don't stand a chance.
Right into the engine bay. I also saw someone say, that's only half the story about the Idaho situation. There isn't a justifiable other half to where you say that attacking firefighters trying to put out a fire is a justifiable action. Never. There's nothing, there's no sorts of claims or heinous things that firefighters do. They put out fires. So what do you mean there's another half to the story? What, the firefighters go up there and taunt the guy? Like what and would that justify what those nuts did? Like, no, none of that does. That must be
a lot of those people are in those like groups like that sort of exist in Idaho. They're not necessarily for any specific government like change or anything like that. They simply want anarchy, and they simply want to bring the country to its knees. There are literally people that exist in groups out there that are minded like that, and they just want to do things like probably like what you saw today, just to cause hell and chaos and fear, to cause people to go berserk. They're called accelerationists, and they're a really bad group of people.
Yeah, very, very dangerous group of people, and there's nothing that they do to serve to benefit. They're just sick, depraved people that want to see the collapse of society and generally the suffering of everyone for no reason in particular. It's just the fact that they like that. I don't even know what's up with those people, honestly, but I say that those people are some of the most dangerous people inside of this country, as a matter of fact. But anyways, moving on from that and down to the Pokrovsk, we did get to see the Ukrainians also hitting Russian forces down here as well, and quite a large number of them.
Also, Heather Fitzgibbon said, I'm glad you realized that before you moved there. I didn't realize how deep it was until I did some research on it, and then I realized, I don't really like that very much. I'm not that I'm scared to move there. I mean, I'm perfectly capable of defending myself if I move there, but I don't want to be around people that have mindsets like that, because I don't like extremists of any sort, especially ones that want to tear the country down. I especially don't like them. So it's not good to be around people like that. So I wouldn't choose to move there just for that reason. Especially after what happened today, you definitely wouldn't move there without a doubt.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't move there. Um, I knew about it when we were considering that as an option, but my idea was that, oh, it's probably overblown because a lot of people say stuff about Alabama, and the stuff that people say about Alabama is very much overblown. Like you would have to go into like the fringiest places of northern Alabama, northeastern Alabama to be able to find people who are in these extremist groups that people always talk about here in the state. You don't find them commonly really anywhere. So what I was thinking when I was hearing about that, I was like, oh, this is probably overblown. There's probably not that many people up there in Idaho that are really like that. And if they are, they're probably out in the middle of nowhere I'd be close to them. But it appears that they're actually just right outside of the biggest cities in North Idaho. So good thing we ruled it out.
No, they're actually here as well. Like they're not just up in northern Alabama. They're across the state, everywhere across the state. There's a very notable group out in Leeds, which isn't too far away from where we are, Enforcer HQ. There's a very bad group that operates out there that happened to cause some havoc back in 2020, and they went all the way across the country to go cause havoc. And a lot of them were based literally over in Leeds. So no, they're definitely here. It's just they're not so visible sometimes.
Oh yeah, I remember those people now. Now I remember them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyways, moving on from that and on into our next clip, we also get to see the Ukrainians also hitting more Russian forces in the Ivan Franko group. And I got to tell y'all, I'm not going to disclose the reason why, but I certainly I would have a massive bullseye on me around people like that if I lived in North Idaho. Not going to get into the reasons why, but that certainly is a place that I could never go. And we can see here the Ivan Franko group spotting, and soon to target a BMP. We see them here bringing in the drone past an airfield, and here it is. They're about to get him. And we can see them slamming into him and putting up their logo like it was the end credits of a movie. But moving on from that and on into our next clip near to Udachny, we also get to see a Ukrainian Leopard on a mission near to the area of Pokrovsk. We see a drone hitting it. Doesn't really mean such. Not really a big issue. The Leopard, it takes it and shrugs it off. See them turning her around, and that's the end of the clip, but still pretty interesting to see. Moving on from that and down the line to Helipol, we also get to see a Ukrainian AMX-10 RC on the move. We don't really see these much anymore, so it's neat to see them whenever we can, and a cool picture of a really cool light tank. I like them a lot. But moving on from that and on out of that area and on down into Kherson, we also get to see them hitting Russian forces in this area as well. We see them continuing to hit Russian forces all over the place within the left bank of the Dnieper River.
Man, they're laying it on them in the swamp.
Man, they finna take Shouty to the swamp.
Oh, look at this. Are those the Russians going down the river?
Oh yeah, those are the Russians, man. They finna put Shouty in the swamp.
And
And
that
there
was
they go.
stupid. They literally went right out into the middle of the river just to go speeding down with a drone right there. That was dumb. Oh. Well.
Oh.
Oh.
Oh, Reese's Pieces.
Oh.
Well, that's the end of that clip. But moving on from that, it's now time for us to go all the way up to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1222 of the war. So, without further ado, here's the speech. Peach!
Дорогі українці, щойно підписав указ про відзначення званням Герой України Максима Устименка, українського льотчика, одного з найкращих наших пілотів. На жаль, посмертно. Сьогодні він загинув захищаючи наше небо, наших людей від чергової російської масованої атаки. Було більш ніж 500 ударних дронів і ракет тільки за одну минулу ніч. Більшість з них було збито. Максим Устименко воював ще з часів АТО. Він освоїв 4 типи літаків, і на його рахунку дійсно важливі результати для України. Боляче втрачати таких людей. Мої співчуття рідним, близьким, друзям та побратимам. Вічна пам'ять. Сьогодні ж підписав указ, яким вводиться в дію рішення РНБО України щодо Оттавської конвенції. Це конвенція про заборону протипіхотних мін. Росія ніколи не була учасницею цієї конвенції і надзвичайно цинічно використовує протипіхотні міни. Причому не тільки зараз, у війні проти України. Це фірмовий почерк російських вбивців – знищувати життя всіма методами, які в них є. І хімічну зброю, і балістику, в тому числі ракети середньої дальності, також різні типи мін, в тому числі протипіхотні. На жаль, так. Звісно, ми бачимо, як наші сусіди в Європі реагують на цю загрозу. Ми знаємо також і складнощі процедури виходу, коли це здійснюється в умовах війни. Робимо цей політичний крок і даємо таким чином сигнал всім нашим партнерам, на чому зосереджуватись. Це стосується всіх країн, які по периметру російських кордонів. Саме протипіхотні міни є інструментом, який дуже часто не має альтернативи для оборони. І ще одне. Наші інституції почали виконувати рішення РНБО України щодо синхронізації санкцій Європи та українських санкцій. Повністю синхронізовані 13 та 14 пакети санкцій ЄС. Це тепер будуть на 100% також санкції України. Сьогодні я затвердив це. Так само на 100% синхронізуємо пакет європейських санкцій щодо режиму в Ірані. Там багато діячів, багато компаній і не тільки те, що стосується військового виробництва та схем зовнішнього терору проти сусідів в регіоні, але й внутрішніх репресій в Ірані. Це один з найбільш жорстоких режимів в світі, і не дивно, що Путін знайшов з ним спільну мову. Ми продовжимо всю цю роботу щодо синхронізації. Я очікую від всіх наших інституцій в державі швидкого руху. Зараз санкції повинні бути одним з ключових пріоритетів. Санкції світу проти Росії – це те, що реально обмежує російські стратегічні можливості розвитку, їхній потенціал, і повинно з кожним днем більш болісно обмежувати російську можливість продовжувати цю війну проти нашої незалежності. Готуємо на наступному тижні нові спільні з партнерами рішення щодо нашого захисту, щодо нашої стійкості. Я дякую всім, хто нам допомагає. Дякую всім, хто дбає про Україну, як про самого себе. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, on day 1222 of our global war news coverage. And that is going to be moving us on into the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to all of y'all. And boy, howdy, folks, what a fun time that's going to be. We absolutely love to get to talk to everyone. I spoke to my psychic medium about it, and they told me it's going to be a hell of a blast. We were able to raise $3.2 thousand so far tonight for Nova Ukraine, an amazing nonprofit helping out Ukrainians across the Ukrainian state. And we will will be making sure to get the chit-chat with all of y'all and thank all of our top donors for y'all support to the fundraiser, and also get to speak to everyone about their questions that they may have. A lot of people have all kinds of interesting questions. We always want to make sure to try and answer as many of them as we can. Also, by the way, folks, tonight is Sunday night fundraiser night. We don't make a dime. We don't make a dollar running this show today. We work like a normal 6-7 hour day just to run the stream at a minimum, and we don't even get paid a cent. So we get the chit chat with all of y'all about your questions in the live chats without anyone having to throw in a super chat for that reason, because when we run a fundraiser, it doesn't allow us to receive super chats at the same time. So if you look right here, here's our YouTube control room. That's actually what I see all the time when I'm not on the air, and you can see the chat revenue is 0. So all of the supports that you're throwing in, it is going directly to the fundraiser, and that we are greatly appreciative of all of y'all doing. And also on top of that, it allows us the chance to get the chit chat with all of y'all, no holds barred. You don't have to throw in a super chat or anything like that. You just ask your question, put @Enforcer Matt at the start of it so that way Matthew can see it, and you can put it in our little spreadsheet so that way we can go and look at the spreadsheet, and then we can say a big thank you and a wahoo to all of the folks who asked a great question. And so with that, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so jumping into our final question segment of the night, we are going to jump right into our Morse code decoders. Tonight we had Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Mason Miami, Joni Dog, Norm Pritchett, Airbell Garbo, and that was the roster. They said the Morse code for today says, "Can you believe what the Iranians did today? It doesn't look peaceful to me," in LLT, LSA.
And long live the Lee Spring Army, and that is the sound of money, because y'all got the jackpot, y'all hit it dead on the nail, and it's impressive to know that y'all continue to get that right time and time again. A truly amazing and profound thing, and I got to thank y'all massively for continuing to get that correct in the Lee Spring Army Signal Corps, because y'all get that right every single night, without fail, without any end to it. It's an amazing thing. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best we can, in my opinion, at a minimum. And it's time for us to get on into the questions. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so before we move into our questions, we do need to read off some top donors since the last time as well. We did see a $150 donation coming from Jim ML, as well as a $100 from BC Skyman, and then a $50 from Skip Tracer 007, and a $50 from Axel K as well. And they helped to bring us up to $3,182 raised, well above the $2,500 goal. So a huge shout out to all 4 of y'all as well, and we do appreciate that very much. And Enforcer, what say you?
And we do appreciate it very much. I got to thank all of our top donors and all of the donors that we are not able to call off for helping out this fundraiser tonight and getting it up to the high number that it's at right now. It's an amazing thing and a wonderful thing to know that so many of y'all are continuing to support this fundraiser and continuing to get it to the amazing heights that it is at the moment. If it wasn't for folks like y'all, we wouldn't be able to make these fundraisers possible, and we wouldn't be able to say, long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die. So a big, big shout out to all of y'all, all the folks that we could call out and all the folks we couldn't call out. And with that in mind, Matty, I understand that we have a great deal of questions that we have to get to and we have to answer, because it is our responsibility to all the folks here in the chat to make sure to get the chit chat with them. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so jumping into this question, this one goes to Bruce. And Bruce said, how many times, excuse me, by the way, I didn't mean to cough right into the mic, but right. Bruce said, how many times do we have to teach the old man a lesson, meaning the Iranian Ayatollah?
You know, I think we have to just teach him again, I suppose. I think this time we got to go all the way, though. You know what I mean? You know, like when you go to a Subway and they say, "How would you like your sandwich?" You say, "All the way." Y'all know what I mean. But beyond that, I'd say that I think this time around we need to go in and deal with the situation fully. We don't need to do a half job or anything like that. We need to go in and deal with it entirely. That would be my honest take on it. And y'all will have to fill in the blanks as to what that'll mean. But with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
We also have a question from Run and Gunny, who said, could the Chinese drone swarm be the reason the U.S. has a spy ship in the area? Maybe so. Maybe so. That spy ship is unusually close to the Chinese coast. So, I mean, it could be that. There's clearly something that's causing them to go very close to China like that. Maybe it's that, or maybe they're trying to do reconnaissance on whether or not they're getting ready to invade Taiwan again. There's just no telling, but it could be. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say it's possible. It certainly could be the case because from what we know, that test happened in eastern China. And considering that vessel is only 100 miles away from Qingdao in the Shandong province, it's a decent likelihood that it could be there for that reason. So actually, I'd say that's probably the best reason why the ship could be there at the moment. So I think you got it down on the nail as far as putting together deduction and reasoning skills. I think you got that down on the nail. Pretty good job right there. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best we can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we've got a question from Great Googly. And they said, what do we have that replaces the A10? We're going to get rid of the A10 and then replace it with what?
Well, we're not going to replace it with anything comparable, per se. Replacing it with something identical would be silly, to an extent. What we are going to do, however, is that we're going to replace it with modern air systems. Because, if y'all don't know, the whole reason the A-10 exists is is military politics, to an extent. There are these people that they called, let me see here. I believe they call them the reformists. And they have stupid ideas. That's probably the best way to put it. Absolutely ridiculous ideas. Like, for example, they are the ones who have done the endless M3 Bradley slander and have said that the Bradley sucks. They were like, oh, the Bradley's terrible. It's a jack of all trades, master of none. As a matter of fact, the movie Pentagon Wars, which a lot of people almost quote like the Bible about how bad the Bradley is based off of a book that was written by a reformist in the military. And this is all acquisition politics. This isn't domestic politics. This is a whole other form of politics that has nothing to do with domestic politics, so I can actually speak on this one. Because I think the reformists are just stupid people. So they say stuff like, oh, the Bradley's terrible. Y'all want to know what they actually said is better than the Bradley? Matthew, take a guess. Think of some vehicle that would fill like a troop carrying role and tell me, what do you think they did? What do you think they said was better than the Bradley? Take a couple of guesses and maybe one or two, and then I'll tell you the actual answer.
Better than, I'll be honest with you, I'd have to see a list to see what they thought was better, because I don't have them memorized like that.
Okay, so I'm going to hit y'all all with it then. I'm going to hit you with the brick, Matthew. The reformist said, the Bradley sucks, it's stupid, and it's a waste of money. And he uses all of these newfangled gimmicks and technologies that just aren't proven to work. Instead, we ought to embrace and love our Lord and Savior of the armored personnel carrier world, the M113.
Now that looks, just from like a layman's perspective, like a Pee-wee compared to the Bradley.
It is a Pee-wee. It is a Pee-wee. The M113 is the armored personnel, one of the first armored personnel carriers that the Army ever had in any large numbers. But there's a big problem with this. The M113 is heavily dated in the modern world. It just doesn't fill any sort of a real role. Pretty much what it is it's a lightly armored, incredibly slow taxi. That's what it is. You could shoot through an M113, by the way, with a typical AKM. You could shoot clean through the armor of an M113 with an AKM. So this thing really doesn't even have armor by modern sense. It's obsolete. So the Army wanted to replace all of these with something new. So they came up with the Bradley, and they said that the Bradley certainly will be the better infantry fighting vehicle. It's not even an armored personnel carrier. It's technically an infantry fighting vehicle because not only will it be able to bring the troops to the battlefield, but it'll be able to provide fire support to the troops and almost serve as like a pseudo tank in a sense with the firepower it has. It has the 30mm Bushmaster. Actually, it's the 25mm Bushmaster if I'm correct, and it also has the TOW launchers, which in the modern day usually use TOW-2Bs, which are top-down attack missiles. These things are doing quite well in Ukraine. They're amazing. But the reformists say that this thing sucks, and the M113 was good. And that's actually where the A-10 came from, because the reformists actually said, I'm not even kidding, when the F-16 and the F-15 were being developed, they said, oh, the F-16s and the F-15s are stupid. They're using all of this newfangled hunky-junky technology that's going to break, and it's going to be unpredictable and unusable. These are going to be just wastes of money. We need to create a real ground buster, a tank buster, like the planes of World War II. Which the concept in itself is obsolete. Like, that war was fought 40 years ago by the time the reformists were bringing this up. We need a plane for us. So they went and designed one. Fairchild Republic did, which was the company that actually designed the A-10, and they came up with the A-10, which is it literally operates off of the concept of a World War II ground attack plane, and that it's pretty much, by its original design, supposed to have a direct line of sight with its target on the ground and destroy it that way with the big-ass gun that it's got. Like, that was the main thing the A-10 was built around. Everything else was designed later, and the hardpoint installations, or at least the ability for the A-10 to use more advanced weaponry, was generally added on with the A-10C. The original A-10A hardly was able to use any kind of guided weaponry at all, except for an AGM-65 Maverick, but the Maverick guides itself, so you didn't need any advanced targeting systems for that. it was such a goofy concept. Like, the A-10 is cool, I will admit, but the concept of trying to make a World War II gunslinger dogfighting plane and update it to be usable in the 80s was just a stupid concept in itself. Yeah, it did okay in the ground support role in the Gulf War to a little extent, and it does look cool, and the gun's really cool, but beyond that, it's just an absolutely silly sort of a thing. And y'all wouldn't believe it, but one of the reformists that was a big part of getting this plane pushed out there, he still says to this day that the F-15, which has the greatest track record of any air superiority aircraft in existence, sucks. He still says it sucks. And y'all know what he wants to say? He's gone so far to actually say that Russian aircraft of any type are better than the F-15. Any Russian aircraft is better than an F-15. That's what the guy says. He's like, the military is a joke. We should have made more A-10 style planes because those really would have gone up against Russian jets. And I'm like, this guy is insane. Also, by the way, he actually has been on Russia Today, which is the Russian state news network, multiple times, just dogging on everything. This guy even went on to dog about the F-35 and say that the F-35 was a waste of money, and it was just a project that pretty much put money into the pockets of the lobbyists or whatever, or, for the generals to put money into the pockets of their friends, instead of it being an actual good aircraft, because the F-35 is an amazingly good plane. So that is generally the premise behind the A-10, is that it was actually a design concept that was brought up by these reformist style people. And as far as I believe, or as far as I think those people have no brains at all to work with. They have to be some of the most unintelligent people imaginable. But still, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. But yeah, it's interesting. But anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Canada is Sovereign, who said, I heard, or have you heard any reports on the dire economic situation in Russia? Banks are seriously close to collapsing, pensions being cut, grocery stores getting bare, and people engaging in civil disobedience.
And I'd have to say we have heard about it a good bit. We've been covering it on and off as much as we can. The last thing we covered on the economic glimpse into Russia was the Rostelmash company saying that there's near-apocalyptic economic conditions going on, and they were halting all assembly line production because of that. But that was about the last thing that we covered inside of the country. Also, folks, I can't say the names of the reformists off the top of my head. I don't really put their names to memory. But it is not Scott Ritter. That I can't promise y'all. It is not him. I see a lot of people bringing him up. No, it's not him. It's some other people. But Scott Ritter isn't the creator of all bad ideas out there, because you also have like Patrick Lancaster and a whole bunch of other people who also have incredibly bad ideas. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to move on to the next one.
All right, and this one goes to Matthew from the live chat, and it's not me; it's another Matthew, a fellow Matthew, and he said, "Do you two think that Russia has the strength to invade Europe?" And no, I don't think they have the strength to invade Europe, but they may have the gall and the stupidity to maybe even start a conflict. Don't rule that out just because they don't have the strength to invade it. They could still start something. It's still on the table. So, I mean, that's Russia's stupidity at play. Invading Ukraine was stupidity at play. Like, that was stupid. And Putin has put his country through hell and back by invading Ukraine. We've seen that over the course of 3+ years. So don't think for a second that he wouldn't even do something as stupid as invading Europe or trying to at least attack with missiles or drones or something like that. Because he could. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that they don't have a chance in hell of ever invading Europe and succeeding. They would fail long before they ever even had a chance of succeeding, especially with the United States supporting the Europeans, which we will apparently at this point, if a conflict like that started. So, no, I would say generally not. Also, I saw someone say in the chat, they're like, BS, the A-10 is a classic. I hate to say it. I don't mean to repeat something. Facts do not care about people's feelings. If you think the A-10's a classic, that does not mean it's a great plane. The A-10 is qualitatively a bad plane. And some people are going to be like, oh, the A-10. I saw some people say, well, the A-10 saved so many lives during the War on Terror. Yeah, but so did the F-15 and the F-16, like the F-15E or the F-16C or some other aircraft of that type. They also saved a lot of lives. But if you look at it, the A-10 is far less usable than any other airframe that we have right now. It is so specialized, and it is so niche, and it is so vulnerable to being shot down. We have to treat that thing like an AC-130 gunship these days. We have to pretty much go, okay, is the airspace completely clear of everything? Yes, okay, now we can send it in, but if there is even a Stinger manpad in the area, it can't go in because it will be shot down. Cool looking, yes. Classic, yes. Effective on a modern battlefield? Absolutely not. It is a death trap. That's why we don't really use it anywhere anymore either. We consider it to be a death trap these days. I have to tell y'all have to look into what they use the A-10 for in Afghanistan. The A-10 was only used in low intensity sectors of combat where there was practically no challenge to air superiority within the area. I mean, it was literally put in the same category in Afghanistan that the AC-130 gunships were put into, and the AC-130 gunship was in the lowest category because the AC-130 gunship can only be used in areas with absolutely no contested air superiority, meaning that there was no ground fire. And also, it can only be used at night, just in case there was any rifle fire that was directed up towards it. Because the AC-130, while cool, let me go pull one up for y'all. Let me go get it. Here we go. Y'all know what I'm talking about. These things are famous in Call of Duty, and a lot of people play Call of Duty. The AC-130 gunships. These things are famous, yes, and they're really cool and they're really badass. But the truth of the matter is that they're completely unusable in the modern day. Like, you can use these against maybe, like, well, hell, you could even use them against the Houthis. The Houthis actually have air defense. You couldn't really use these things against anybody right now. There's no one in the world that we could actually use these things against because they have a good chance of shooting it down if it's attempted to be used. Same with the A-10. The A-10 was in the same classification category as the AC-130 in Afghanistan. That's how susceptible it was to being damaged or shot down from ground fire, is that it was put in the same category as a transport plane that's carrying around massive cannons and Gatling guns. So, like, the A-10 just doesn't serve a purpose anymore. Even the Air Force knows it, and that's also why they're trying as quickly as they can to replace them at the moment with something that will be better, like the F-15E or the F-15EX, or say an F-35, because the F-35 actually is a multi-role stealth fighter if you outfit it with external pylons. It's a low visibility multi-role, and it actually can do the job of the A-10 far better in the modern fighting space than the A-10 ever would have. But I hope that does address that well, at least the best I can, because I know a lot of people like defend the A-10 to the point that they would literally die on the hill. But the truth is that everyone knows that actually deals with the A-10. It's just not a useful plane anymore. It's outlived its usefulness. It was cool for its era, but that era is passing us, and we have to adapt or we'll die. So that's kind of the truth of it. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Yor, who said, do you think the Russians will use Chinese fighter jets, such as the J-10C?
I don't think they will, because they have to prop up their own arms industry, so they'll most likely never end up using a J-10, unless if the Russian arms industry completely collapses, which I don't see happening even after this war. That would take decades for that to occur. Kind of like how the British went from developing their own aircraft like the English Electric Lightning to eventually they had to team up with the Germans to create the Panavia Tornado, and then that was decades down the line, and that was when British aerospace industries finally died because the British government pulled funding for them because they said, quote unquote, they were too expensive and aircraft in the sense we see today will be obsolete in a decade or two and it'll all be fought with missiles, so let's just not even invest in aircraft companies, let's just invest in missiles. And then they did that and the missiles flopped, and then the aircraft companies went under, so then they had nothing, and then they went to Panavia, and the Germans and the British came together to create the Tornado, and then the Eurofighter Typhoon. But anyways, I hope that does address that well, at least the best I can, and we're on to the next one.
And this one goes to Mad Machine. He said, could the A-10 that's being retired be configured instead to be used like a drone, and with the pilot safe from afar from the front lines?
You possibly could, but then you also have to consider the cost of maintenance and the logistics of providing spare parts, and then that could become prohibitively expensive, and it might be cheaper at that point to just simply use Ukrainian drones that are, a couple of $100 a piece instead of using an aircraft that costs millions of dollars, and then also having to provide hundreds of thousands of dollars of spare parts on a pretty regular basis at that point. And so with that, I hope that addresses that well, and we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to O-Tubes, who said, I watched a video other night, and they predict the world will be at war by 2026 or 2027. And what are your thoughts? It's kind of hard to say exactly when it's going to happen. One thing, in my personal belief, I'm not sure the enforcer is going to have a different opinion than this, but I would say the World War III is a certainty. The question is, when is it going to happen? That's the question, because over history has shown us that these wars, the world wars, they happen on a repeated interval. World War I and World War II is the most recent ones, but there's been wars around the world throughout history. So I would say we're probably due for another one coming up soon, but that's just my speculation. But I would say it is coming up imminently at some point. Now, where it starts, that's also another big question. Some people speculate it's going to start in the Middle East. Some people speculate it's going to start in Europe. There's just no telling. One place I would say it's not going to start is going to be the South China Sea or near China. That's probably not going to cause world war, but the Middle East has the real high potential for it, and also clearly Europe does. If Europe's attacked, that's NATO, and that's probably the highest risk for World War III. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that World War is happening on an interval. That's something I might not agree with, because World War I and World War II happened within 20 years of each other, and it's 80s or 85 years after the end of World War II, and we still haven't had the Third World War yet. So on intervals, not quite. Like it's not really like a timed egg sort of a thing where it happens.
I mean, it doesn't have to be. When I say an interval, I don't mean like an exact like time frame. Like, in 60 years another one will happen. I don't mean like that. I mean like a range. Like, from like a certain amount of years to this range, or if you know what I'm saying with that, then one's likely to happen within that range, because history does repeat. And we've seen large scale wars like that on a regular interval within a certain range of time. And I think we're coming due for one, at least in my opinion.
I would say one's coming. I would say that probably by the late 2020s or the early 2030s, I guarantee you that we'll probably see a major conflict by then. Whether it'll be a world war or not is really the question, but there will definitely be a major conflict by the late 2020s or the early 2030s that happens somewhere in the world. But saying that it'd be a world war, it's a little bit tough, because the Russians could collapse before then. So the situation in Europe would be assured at that point. It would be safe. The situation in the Middle East could be dealt with this year. So then that situation's done. But the only one that would not be done with by then would be the China-Taiwan situation, which could turn into a major war or possibly a world war. It's just really hard to say for now. But there will definitely be a major conflict by the late 2020s or the early 2030s, in my opinion, for sure. And so
The sad part about the Chinese situation, it's the reason why it's sad is because we wouldn't come to Taiwan's aid unless we had a legitimate reason for doing so. The TSMC factory will be fully removed from Taiwan's island and transplanted into the United States in like the next year, I believe, or next 2 years or something like that, or maybe even sooner than that. Some very close time frame. TSMC will be fully transplanted from Taiwan to America, and once that happens, unfortunately, Taiwan might get abandoned after that. That's obviously not a ideal thing, nor is that really fair to Taiwan, but that's just the way it's going to work. If the United States has no interest in the island, then we might just let China go take Taiwan, and that might be the end of it. And unfortunately, it might end like that. That's why I don't think Taiwan's going to lead to a world war, because there is a timer right now on the relevance of Taiwan, and it's just unfortunate, but that's the way it works. So Taiwan probably will not be the start of World War III, at least in my opinion, because it's just not going to be relevant.
I would say that's still going to be relevant in the future. I mean, we still have to contain the Chinese, whether TSMC is there or not. So I think it still would hold some relevance by the late 2020s or early 2030s. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Rosalie, who said, how long does it take to train a pilot on an F-16? And wasn't that part of the reason we didn't give to Ukraine previously?
It takes a good while to train a pilot on the F-16. I believe for the Ukrainians, it took about 1.5 years, which was an incredibly long period of time. But you just train more pilots. You just keep them in a constant rotation of being trained and bringing in new pilots. And that's how you largely deal with that situation. It's not like that isn't an immediate roadblock to say, no, that's just some obstacle that you have to work around and keep in mind. But that would be my answer to that question. So with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, let's see. Little Bear said China's usually patient. Yeah, that's my thoughts as well. China probably knows that the U.S. is going to lose interest in Taiwan. And that's probably why they haven't pulled their invasion off. That's my guess, because they've waited a long time. And remember, we had heard like a month or two ago that they had a lot of their landing barges already prepared and ready to go, and they were practicing a landing with those barges. Now, they still need to develop some more of them and build them, but they were getting pretty close. But we still haven't seen any indication yet that China is going to pull the trigger on it imminently, which it tells me that China must be waiting for something, and they're going to play the long game instead of playing the short-term game on this, which probably means they're waiting until TSMC literally builds the factory in America before they go invade Taiwan. That's my guess. But that's just my speculation personally. They could be waiting just because they want to wait for a more opportune time geopolitically. That could be it as well. But it's just kind of hard to tell. But I think TSMC, unfortunately, is putting the death nail in Taiwan by moving. It's obviously good for their company and it's good for the world, but it's not going to be beneficial to the Taiwanese government or the Taiwanese people.
Maybe. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Ryan Peacock. He said, having said that, what do you think of the new purchase of Sky Tractors for the military?
The Sky Tractors are an interesting idea. Let me go pull one up to show it to all of y'all. Let's see, the Sky Tractor. Here we go. The Sky Raider 2. These are glorified crop dusters for the large part that have been armed with weapons. But the idea is that we want some sort of a cheap aircraft to be able to conduct longer loiter missions in areas where there is no contested airspaces, to be able to support in the event of a asymmetrical conflict, kind of like the ones we saw in Afghanistan a while ago. That's really the reason. That's really the purpose that these things fill. I think it's a decent purpose, and of course the aircraft numbers are going to be small. It's a fairly niche sort of an aircraft for a niche sort of a role, and they're incredibly cheap. So I think that they really fill the parameters that we're looking for. They're cheap, they're small, they're easy to repair, easy to maintain, they're pretty rugged, pretty reliable, and on top of that, they're filling the kind of role that the A-10 filled that was way more expensive than these aircraft are. So I would say that this thing certainly is filling the role that it's supposed to fill. I think it's a pretty good option. But this thing was just introduced recently in 2025 and was manufactured by L3 Harris and Air Tractor, which is a crop duster production company. You can actually see some of their great models present here.
Oh, wow, look at that. That's a flying duck.
Flying duck. It most likely is. Look at that. It's a
Ugh. That's ugly.
Man, look, but it's got bombs on it though. Does your crop duster have bombs? I thought not. I think not. Look, this one actually has Hellfires on board. That's pretty sick.
It looks good in this paint job right here, but in the other paint job, it's not looking good.
No, it looked terrible. But dude, honestly, these things are hilarious. But I think they're neat, and I think they do fill an important role. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so this one goes to it's Court, who said, could the attacks today in Idaho be related to an Iranian sleeper cell? And I would say probably not, probably because there's a heavy concentration of supremacist groups that exist in Idaho and also domestic terror organizations that exist there. So I would say probably not. It's probably most likely a domestic lunatic that decided to go off the handle. But that's just my guess. It could be proven wrong. But Enforcer, what say you?
I pretty much agree with Matthew on that one. And so with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Bradley Hall, who said, what do you guys think about the unveiling of the SR-72 Blackbird? If you guys talked about this on a previous stream.
I don't think I've talked about that at all, as a matter of fact.
I wasn't where they had released that.
I haven't heard about that either, as a matter of fact. Let's see here. Trying to see. Not really seeing much on it. Because that is the plane from like Top Gun, I believe. This one.
Yeah, so that's actually the Dark Star right there. That's not even known. Is it known as the SR-72, or is at least the movie called it that?
Well, apparently it is, because every single thing here is going back to the SR-72 Dark Star or whatever. Like, I would have to say this thing isn't quite real, and I can't find any reputable source to say that this thing actually is real. It just is. It's a neat fabrication, and that's about it from what I can tell. So I can't really make a comment on it. I have to declare ignorance because I haven't heard about the SR-72 being anything other than a very advanced-looking movie prop. But with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person that threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is going to be a Hokey Redneck. He said, can you talk a little bit about the B-21 and tell us about the capabilities and how it's going to be useful in future wars?
I can't really tell you a lot about its capabilities. Not a lot has been published about the Raider, at least out there for the world to see. But I can show you a picture of one in flight and they look incredibly cool. Honestly, I think they look cooler than the B2 because of those weird windows that they have at the front for the cockpit. It's really
Pull up a
bizarre.
picture. Pull up the sign profile of a falcon. Like pull that up real quick, like a real bird.
A falcon bird side profile. When it's in the dive. Here we go.
Flight.
There it is.
Yeah, look at that. And you can see the resemblance. Oh no, no, there's another picture. Go back.
Which one?
That one right there in the middle below the main picture you just clicked on right here. Yeah, there we go. You can see the resemblance in the design of the B2 and the B-21 based on that falcon bird right there. Literally, you can see the tail feathers on the bird. It kind of tapers off like on the actual aircraft design, and it's also kind of a little bit bulbous right there in the middle part of the aircraft to a sharp nose. So it's really wild how they did model it after a bird's flight for that flying wing design. That was actually pretty cool.
Yeah, it is actually pretty cool. You know, there was actually another vehicle out there in the world that had its design heavily influenced off of a bird as well. Do you know what I'm talking about, Matthew?
After a bird, which one is it?
A kingfisher.
A kingfisher. Yeah, I haven't really seen that.
You haven't seen a kingfisher?
No.
No. These are birds, which will be eaten on Tuesday. These are the kingfishers.
Oh yeah, I've seen those flying around quite a bit right there. They're just buzzing around the airports and stuff.
Okay, yeah, I saw it. Yeah. I was like, okay, all right. But one thing that's interesting about the kingfisher is to share with you a story, Matthew. Let me go show you the E1 Shinkansen. Because out there in Japan, you know the Japanese have to do it this way, Matthew. They have to do it. They're the Japanese. They have to do it this way. This is something that's actually quite interesting. Here is the original Shinkansen right there. It is the second one from the left, right there. And the problem is that when it would leave tunnels, it actually would almost create like a sonic boom-like noise because of how much air displacement it was making and the speeds it was pushing through the tunnel. So the issue is that they had to figure out how to cut that down. And if you look right over to the left, this is actually the most advanced variant of the Shinkansen. And if you notice, its nose section is similar to that of the face of a kingfisher, and that's because the designer of the new nose of the Shinkansen actually said that he was walking through a park, and one day he saw a kingfisher dive into a pond to grab a fish, and it made almost no water resistance at all because of the long beak, which was able to pretty much push the water out of the way before most of the body made it into the water. So they said, oh, well, that must work incredibly well in fluid resistance and air resistance, so let's design the new nose or head end of the locomotive to resemble that of the beak of a kingfisher. So that way it'll push the air out of the way, a lot like a kingfisher's beak pushes the water out of the way when it dives into a lake. So they designed the new Shinkansen like that, and it cut down on noise pollution, I think, by like 80% or so. So incredibly interesting, actually, how a lot of people take inspiration from nature to be able to find out how to produce our vehicles in more efficient ways.
Although they could have just I think they could have just looked at ship design because, you know, the bow of ships literally have the same principle going on. They're trying to get the water to flow as seamlessly as possible over the front part of the bow, which is essentially what the front part of this train is right here. It's like the leading edge of a bow of a boat.
Yeah, one thing that's always interesting. I don't know why it always takes a lot for people to find this out, but a longer nose of a vehicle means less resistance. In general, you know, it's always interesting to see like longer leading edges of anything leads to less resistance. But still, that is something that we're saying now, knowing that information when they were designing these back in the 80s.
If only I could have thought that back in the day, I could have patented that.
Yeah, like if only we were around in the 80s when they learned that, which is something that we consider to be common knowledge nowadays. When they were having these, you know, maybe we would have done good or done better. But generally, it's an interesting thing. But as far as the B-21, it is actually smaller than the B-2 in terms of payload, I believe, if I remember what they said correctly. But there's going to be far more of these. And also, their stealth abilities are going to be far more pronounced than even that of the B-2. So in all manners, it is a smaller bomber than the B-2, but it's going to be a better bomber than the B-2. That's really all I can describe about the B-21 Raiders so far, but I'm a big fan of them. And I also like that these things have this weird, creamy white color to them. I've never seen this in a stealth coating before, and it's incredibly unique. I think it looks really cool, actually. It almost makes the thing look like a ghost.
Yeah, it kind of does. I like it. I wish they would give us a better view of it though. Like they give us these very obscure views of the thing, obviously for OPSEC reasons, I think. But oh, well, that's a better picture of it. Can you zoom in a little bit on that?
Maybe. Yeah, well, actually we can. Dang, that's
Oh wow,
actually
look at that. Never mind. We've got a nice view of it right here. Let's see. Yeah, that thing is noticeably a lot smaller than the B2, or at least from this angle, it looks a lot smaller. What is that little part right there at the top that's popped open at the top of the fuselage?
I think that's like that low speed air intake that they had on the B2, but different.
Interesting. Is that the Pyto tube at the front of it? That huge red bar?
Yeah, I think that's for like the testing stuff, like to get the readings, I believe. That won't be on the production series. That's just for
I
the
hope not.
prototypes. Yeah, like that would be goofy, man. Oh, let's put this giant cane on the front of this thing and fly it around. No, they're not going to be having that around because I think that was actually on the B2 prototypes as well, if I remember correctly, or at least the F-16 prototypes. But it's still an interesting sort of a system, that I will say. That I will definitely say. Look at that.
I like that a lot. These B2s and B21s, they look so cool. Like when they're at the right lighting and stuff like that on the front, they look very menacing.
I'm not going to lie, though. This kind of does look dorky from this angle, though. I'm not going to lie.
Looks like a dolphin a little bit.
Yeah, it kind of does. Also, man, if you notice, look at how smooth everything is. Man, that thing is so smooth. Look at that.
That's good machining right there. Look at that.
Man, impressive stuff right there. So apparently, folks, the lesson of the day is that Falcons have low radar profiles, or radar cross sections, as they call them. But with that, I hope we were able to answer that somewhat well, at least with the information that we have at the moment. And let me see here really quickly. You know what? I'm interested. Do we have any pictures of the prototype B2? This is its first publicized flight in 1989. What about... So this was its first public display in 1988.
It does look a little bit dated compared to the B21, I will say. Like when you look at them side by side or at one after the other, the B2 does look a little bit old.
Yeah, it does look pretty old, actually. This thing is getting on up there in years. Like, honestly, man, this thing kind of looks like from a bygone era compared to the B21. Like, the B21 just looks so much more advanced than the B2 even.
Yeah, it really does. It's just they have different like use applications though, right? Like the B2 is like a heavy bomber, and the B21's like a stealth. Well, it's not a stealth fighter, I don't think. But what's the use case of this one?
Oh no, the B21 fills the same strategic bomber role as the B2.
What kind of payloads this thing got?
It's got a smaller one. I don't know if they published that. Because I remember back in the day when I was looking for that info, they hadn't published it yet. So let me see if they published it anywhere. Program cost, maintenance, flight and testing. So let's see here. It has a capacity of 20,000 pounds.
Compared to a B2, which can hold what?
A lot more. Like, I know that off the top of my head. It can carry way more than that. Let me go down here and tell y'all really quickly. So, the payload of a B2 is 60,000 pounds. So, it would take three B21s to make up the payload of a single B2 bomber.
Well, it couldn't even carry a mop. The B21 can't,
No, it
because the
actually
mop's 30,000 pounds. So how's it expected to replace the B2?
I don't really know. I guess they are not planning on having ordnance of that size anymore in the Air Force. Maybe. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly because it's a little bit interesting to note that the B-21 is a third the payload capacity. I would guess a third the size as well of a B-2. Way more advanced looking, for sure. But I guess it's a strategic bomber that's filling a more tactical role. Maybe the best way to explain it. Because it's still a strategic bomber. Like, that's the role it fills in the Air Force. But it only has a third the payload. So I guess like a tactical strategic bomber, it's like right on the threshold of almost being like a tactical ground attack aircraft, maybe.
Sounds like somebody kind of had the idea of, we're not going to send in like big munitions. We're going to send in like a bunch of smaller munitions and just do it with a smaller aircraft. I'm not sure what their like thought process was behind this because I'm not understanding it really.
I'm going to have to look into it a little bit more to see if I can figure out some more details and info on it. But still, it's a cool aircraft. That I will admit. It looks cool, and it looks nice. I like it. But with that, I hope we addressed that well, and we've actually reached the end of tonight's stream tonight, folks. I got to thank you all so much once again for watching. We had 180,000 viewers here over the course of the stream, and a peak viewership of 18,800 people. We thank you all so much once again for being here tonight and enjoying this stream, because if it wasn't for folks like all of y'all, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible. And a huge shout out to y'all once again for raising an amazing $3,300 nearly, it's technically $3,276 for the fundraiser. And so with that, we will see you all possibly tomorrow for a short war summary. If there is one to be made, I'll be making it. And if not, we will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of news from around the world. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And with that, folks, thank you all for joining us once again tonight, and a huge shout out for helping us to reach $3,276 raised of the $2,500 goal. And we do appreciate every single one of you very much for that. And a big shout out to all 180,000 people that were here by the end of the stream. And we will see you tomorrow on the Short War video, and most likely no stream tomorrow because there's probably not going to be big news on that front. And of course, Mondays are off days. So we will see you all again on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. And with that, thank you all once again, and Slava Ukraine, Hero Slava, get some rest, and good night.